He was a man of the modern world, proud of his freedom, proud of his success, and proud that he needed no one to guide him. Religion was something he had left behind in childhood stories, folded up like an old letter and placed in the back of a drawer, never to be opened again. He provided well for his family, loved his son, and felt that was enough. What else could life ask of him? What more could he possibly need? But sometimes it's not the grand events that shake a person. Sometimes it's a sentence. Sometimes it's the quiet voice of a child. One evening, while driving home from school, his son looked up at him with innocent eyes and said, "Baba, I want to be like Muhammad. Peace be upon him." The father blinked. For a moment, he said nothing. He looked into the rearview mirror, saw his son's small, sincere smile, and felt a strange stillness in his chest. Of all the heroes, of all the names, his son chose Muhammad. Peace be upon him. Not a sports star, not a cartoon figure, but the prophet. And he didn't say it like he was quoting something. He said it like it came from the deepest part of his heart. That night, the father couldn't sleep. Those words echoed again and again. Why? Why would his son, who had never been deeply taught religion at home, feel this connection? What did he see in the prophet that the father had missed all these years? He got out of bed and began to search, not out of obligation, out of curiosity, out of a quiet hunger to understand what his child saw. He read about the prophet's life, his mercy, his justice, his strength wrapped in humility, the man who forgave those who hurt him, who fed the poor, comforted the broken, and lived with the simplicity of someone who knew his value wasn't in gold or status, but in serving his Creator. The more the father read, the more he felt tears come to his eyes. He realized this was not just the man his son admired, this was the man he himself had needed all along. His child's love became his mirror. It showed him what was missing in his own heart, and slowly, what was once just a moment of reflection became a journey. He started praying again. He began to speak gently. He became more mindful, more thankful, more connected. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had entered his home, not through lectures or debates, but through the pure love of a child. In that moment, everything changed. This wasn't just a father raising a son, it was a son raising a father toward light. A simple sentence led to a lifetime of faith, and a once distant heart found its way back through the name, the character, and the mercy of the greatest man to ever walk the earth. He never imagined that one small sentence from his child could shake his entire view of the world. For years, he lived his life comfortably distant from religion. Islam was a label, something on paper, something people in his family mentioned from time to time, but not something that truly touched his heart. He believed in being a good person, providing for his family, and keeping things simple. Religion, to him, felt like an extra weight, something from the past that didn't fit into his modern lifestyle. But all of that began to shift the day his son looked up at him with bright eyes and said, "I want to be like Muhammad, peace be upon him." At first, he didn't know how to respond. He smiled, maybe even nodded, but deep inside, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: the need to understand. What did his son mean by that? Where did he learn it? Was it just something he heard at school or from a friend? The question began to grow in his mind. As much as he tried to brush it off, those words kept echoing in his heart. Something about the way his son said them, with such purity and conviction, made it impossible to ignore. Later that night, he sat alone, replaying the moment. He thought about his son's innocence, his sincerity, and how he had chosen the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as his role model. It was a name the father hadn't thought about deeply in years. He remembered bits and pieces from his childhood, stories of kindness, truthfulness, and mercy, but they had faded into the background of adulthood. Now they were returning, and they carried more meaning than ever before. He began searching, reading, watching, not because someone forced him, but because something inside him was stirred. He wanted to know who the prophet really was, not as a figure in history, but as someone his own son admired so deeply. As he explored the life of the prophet, he started to understand. And that understanding began to melt the layers of distance he had built over the years. It wasn't about religion being a burden anymore. It was about discovering a man whose character was too beautiful to ignore. And all of it started with 6 simple, sincere words from a child. The next few days felt different. The father found himself more attentive, more curious, and strangely more at peace whenever he thought about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He began to notice something else too, his son's behavior. He had never paid deep attention before, but now he saw how gentle his son tried to be with others, how he shared his things, how he chose his words carefully, and how he seemed to avoid hurting anyone's feelings. When he asked his son why he acted this way, the boy simply said, "Because that's what the prophet would do." It was a simple answer, but it carried such weight. The father felt both admiration and shame. Admiration for the pure heart of his son, and shame for how far he himself had drifted from those values. He thought he was the one guiding his child, but here was his child silently guiding him. That realization struck him deeply. He wasn't just raising a boy, he was being raised as a man, again, in a better way, through the eyes of a child who loved the prophet. At night, he started watching short clips and reading small passages about the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The more he learned, the more he realized how powerful yet gentle the prophet was. He read how the prophet forgave those who insulted him, cared for the weak, loved children, respected women, and stood for truth no matter the cost. It was not just the actions that touched him, it was the consistency of the prophet's mercy and strength that moved him most. Every lesson he learned made him reflect on himself. Was he as patient, as honest, as loving? The answer was often no, but that didn't discourage him, it motivated him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a real example to follow, someone worth admiring, someone worth trying to be like. He started applying small changes. He watched his tone when speaking to his wife. He apologized when he was wrong. He smiled more, yelled less. All these small things weren't because someone lectured him. It was because the light of the prophet's example, shone through his child, had reached his heart. And once that light entered, it refused to leave. One afternoon, as he sat quietly in his living room, he looked at his son playing on the carpet with his toys. A small smile crept onto his face, not because of the game, but because of what that little boy had done to his heart. Just a few weeks ago, he was a man who rarely thought about faith. He was caught up in life, in deadlines, in making money, and chasing comfort. But now something deeper had taken root. He had begun reading about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, not just as a figure of the past, but as someone who was still alive in the hearts of millions, including his son. He remembered one particular night when he came across a narration about how the prophet would stand in prayer until his feet swelled, crying for the forgiveness of his people. That image of the most powerful man in Arabia, alone in the night, crying in humility before his Creator, shattered something in him. How could someone with such power remain so humble? How could someone treated so harshly still respond with forgiveness? The more he read, the more he fell in love with a man he had once ignored. He started changing his schedule. He'd wake up a bit earlier to pray, something he hadn't done in years. He downloaded a Quran app, read a verse or two each day, and often paused to reflect on their meanings. He found himself becoming softer with his son, thanking him for inspiring something so precious. His son noticed the change too, and their bond grew stronger, not just as father and son, but as companions on a shared path. One evening, the boy came and sat in his lap and said, "Baba, I'm proud of you." That moment brought tears to his eyes. He wasn't just proud of being a provider anymore. He was proud of becoming someone his child could truly look up to. And in striving to become like the man his son loved, he found not just connection, but peace. That small wish from a child, "I want to be like Muhammad, peace be upon him," wasn't just a dream. It became the roadmap that brought a father back to the light he didn't even know he was missing. After the father had spent a few days silently observing his son's admiration for the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he found himself wrestling with an unexpected question. What kind of man inspires a child to want to be like him in today's world? The question didn't leave his mind. The father knew superheroes, athletes, and actors typically filled that space for most children. Yet his son, in a soft and sincere voice, chose someone he had never even seen with his eyes. That struck him deeply. So he began digging deeper into who the prophet truly was, not through social media noise or biased portrayals, but from the original sources, the stories of his companions and the lives he changed. What he found stunned him. He read about a man who forgave those who tried to kill him, who stood up for the rights of women and the poor, who showed mercy to children and animals alike. He learned how the prophet would visit the sick, comfort the grieving, and cry in prayer for people he had never even met. These weren't just tales from the past. They were timeless examples of real character, the kind of character he wanted to embody but had never known how. He realized that this wasn't about rituals or rules at its core. It was about becoming someone who lives with purpose, who uplifts others, who carries light even in dark times. And that's what his son had already seen in his own simple and innocent way. One particular narration stayed with him for days. When the prophet was once humiliated and injured by a town, he had the power to call down punishment on them, but instead he prayed for their guidance. That story shook him. He realized how quick he had been to anger, how slow to forgive. He began reflecting on his own actions and decided to make changes. Not grand or loud, but sincere and steady. The child's sentence had become a mirror, and in that reflection, the father no longer saw a man running from fate. He saw someone being guided back to it, one step at a time, through the beautiful example of Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the pure heart of his own son. The moment that truly shifted everything came on a quiet weekend morning. The father was sitting with a cup of tea, scrolling through his phone, when his son walked in wearing a white thobe he had worn at the masjid the week before. With shining eyes, he said, "Baba, do I look like the Prophet Muhammad today?" The father froze for a moment, not out of confusion, but from the sudden emotional wave that question brought. This wasn't just admiration anymore, it was love. Pure, innocent love. From a child who had found his hero in someone most adults ignore. That simple question didn't leave him for the rest of the day. Do I look like the prophet? It echoed in his heart, challenging him. Not just about appearance, but about character. He thought to himself, if his son wants to be like Muhammad, peace be upon him, then how could he, the father, continue living without even trying to do the same? How could he let the child lead while he remained spiritually asleep? That day, something shifted permanently. The father began to see every action through a new lens. When he spoke, he remembered the prophet's gentleness. When he became angry, he remembered how the prophet controlled his temper. When he saw someone in need, he recalled how the prophet never turned anyone away. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about honoring the one his son loved and believed in. The father started taking small steps. He began praying regularly again, not to perform for others, but to connect with the one the prophet worshipped so consistently. He began watching lectures and reading more seerah, but more importantly, he changed how he treated people, his wife, his colleagues, strangers. He began smiling more, listening more, and forgiving more. He didn't need to make grand announcements. The change in his eyes, in his voice, in his calmness spoke volumes. He realized that if his son wanted to be like Muhammad, peace be upon him, then the best gift he could give him was to try and do the same. Side by side, they could walk that path. And in doing so, faith no longer became a theory, it became a living, breathing example within their home. As time passed, the father noticed how his son's innocent wish to be like the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had begun to ripple through every part of their lives. It was no longer just a child's admiration. It was a catalyst for transformation. The father started to feel a deep sense of responsibility, not just to provide for his family, but to be a real role model, worthy of his son's love and respect. He realized that being like the prophet wasn't about perfection. It was about sincere effort, humility, and kindness. This understanding brought peace to his heart. He began to appreciate the simplicity and beauty of the prophet's example, the way he treated others with respect regardless of their status, how he forgave enemies, and how he stayed humble despite his greatness. Slowly but surely, the father's daily routine changed. He made time for prayer, not out of obligation, but out of connection. He started practicing patience, especially with his family, noticing how even small acts of kindness brought light into their home. His relationship with his wife deepened as he learned to listen more and argue less. Friends and neighbors noticed a new calmness in him, a quiet strength born from faith. What touched him most was the growing bond with his son. The boy's eyes would light up when his father showed even the smallest effort to learn or do good. The father realized that this journey wasn't just about teaching his son. It was about growing together. The little boy who once simply said, "I want to be like Muhammad," had become the gentle guide who inspired his father to become a better man. In this shared path, the father found more than just faith. He found purpose and joy. The child's simple wish had become a powerful force that changed his heart forever. It reminded him that sometimes the purest guidance comes from the smallest voices, and that true transformation begins with love. Through his son's eyes, he saw the prophet's light, and that light led him home. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this deeply moving story about the incredible impact a child's innocent words can have on a parent's life. We witnessed how a simple sentence from a son, "I want to be like Muhammad, peace be upon him," became a powerful catalyst for change in his father's heart. This story reminds us all that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest wisdom, and that love can break through even the toughest barriers, leading to sincere transformation and renewed faith. Throughout this journey, we saw how the father began to reflect deeply on his own life, values, and actions. The child's pure admiration for the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, stirred something inside him that had been dormant for years. It made him question what kind of example he wanted to set, not just for his son, but for himself. This sparked a sincere effort to learn more about the Prophet's character, kindness, and mercy, and to bring those qualities into his own life. The father's change was gradual, steady, and heartfelt, showing us that true transformation doesn't happen overnight, but grows through intention, patience, and love. We also saw how this journey didn't only affect the father individually, but brought a new warmth and closeness into the family. The bond between father and son deepened as they walked this path together. The father realized that being a good parent means more than providing material needs. It means living with integrity, humility, and compassion, just as the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did. This story encourages us to look at our own relationships and consider how we can inspire and be inspired by those closest to us. If this video moved you, inspired you, or made you think, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue to bring stories of hope, faith, and positive change to more people around the world. May the beautiful example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, guide us all towards kindness, forgiveness, and a life filled with purpose. Thank you again for watching and being part of this journey with us. May peace and blessings be upon you and your loved ones always.